Hey Ghoul friends, it's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of paranormal folklore from Latin American and Hispanic cultures. Now, right off the bat, as you may have seen in the title, we have a monstrous special guest today that I'm very excited about. But before that, if you are a best Ghoul friend on Patreon, then you have the option to watch the video version of this episode. And speaking of video, Susto is now available on YouTube and YouTube Music, meaning that it will be available as a podcast. So like every other podcast platform, new episodes will be populating on YouTube, and although video versions of the episodes will remain a Patreon exclusive, the audio version of the episodes will be on YouTube and YouTube Music. But I will be making videos. It's something that I've always enjoyed doing, so you'll see some content on there that is public, available to everybody. It might be Susto related, it might not be. I just want to have fun with it, and if you all have any ideas for me, please feel free to send them in. You can subscribe by visiting youtube.com/@SustoPodcast. I am excited to see you there. So moving on, I want to let you know that my guest today and I are hosting a giveaway, so stay tuned for more details on that later in the episode. And without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce them. Gerardo Sámano Córdova is a writer and artist from Mexico City, living in Brooklyn. He's currently writer in residence at Fordham University. He got his MFA from the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University in Michigan. He has studied at Breadloaf as a work study scholar and fellow, and at the Tin House Summer Workshop. Gerardo is the author of Monstrilio, which is now one of my all-time favorite books, and I have it here. The book published in 2023, in case you haven't had a chance to pick it up yet. Monstrilio is a thought-provoking meditation on grief, acceptance, and the monstrous sides of love and loyalty. His short stories have appeared in Catapult, The Common, Ninth Letter, Passages North, Chicago Quarterly Review, and others. And he is currently working on a second novel. And fun fact, he's been known to draw little creatures. Please welcome to Susto, Gerardo Sámano Córdova. Gerardo, hello. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So in case there is something that I maybe did not cover in that intro, is there anything else you would like to let the listeners know about yourself?
I think you covered a lot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I did my
Uh,
research.
yeah, and I love it. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add right
Perfect.
now.
So we'll go ahead and get into the questions then. Before I ask real questions, because we will be talking about your writing, but I'm very curious about these little creatures that you draw. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just like drawing, like doodling little creatures. I have an Instagram for them. I used to draw them more often. But yeah, so it's just like I don't think I'm like the best illustrator or drawer in the world, but I like doing them. I have like, well, I can show you like a tattoo of a little octopus here,
That's so cute.
and I have others, but yeah. So I mean, I just like silly little creatures.
I love that. Is doodling part of your writing process as well? Like for Monstrilio, were you ever like doodling what you thought maybe M looked like?
Well, there is, if you have the book, well, it depends on what version it is, but there's like an illustration I did of like Monstrilio when he's like a furry little creature.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it helps me imagine things. Um, so I will like doodle maps or like to wrap my head around how these things um are gonna look. But especially for Monstrilio, it really helped kind of like visualize what the creature is. Also because Monstrilio kind of evolves throughout the book, so it was helpful to have like a more visual um place for me to go to and kind of like go from there and kind of like have an anchor, like a visual anchor. I'm a visual person, so
Hmm.
it helps to have
Yeah.
that.
I feel like, yeah, I can definitely tell that you're a visual person in your writing and the way that you describe things. It's so like I could see them kind of like being built in my head. I'm a very visual person too, so I really, really enjoyed not only Monstrilio but all of your writing. And also like I have this version of the book with this kind of like color blocking on it, and then
Yeah,
little Monstrilio peeking out from the bottom, which
yeah,
I think is adorable. Which is funny, right? Because this is truly a book about or one of the big parts of this book is he's this little monster that's kind of like created right out of this almost twisted kind of desperation to hang on to a loved one. And then I keep reading it, I'm like, oh, he's cute. um,
yeah,
but as you know, our culture features storytelling, right? And I'm
right.
talking about like Latin America and Mexican culture, especially ghost stories. And I've heard you talk about these kinds of stories in other interviews. So I want to know how much of that came up in your upbringing, and do you think it's contributed to your own storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like you said, like our culture is steeped in kind of like these supernatural stories, ghost stories, um, and just like general superstitions and stuff like that, which come up almost always in like casual conversations,
Yeah.
with family, with friends, and whether you believe them or not, because sometimes you're like, oh, that's kind of like impossible, but also it's part of the culture, so it's kind of like a state of where you accept them as part of things that are happening and not happening at the same time. So it's kind of like a system of belief in which you don't have to fully commit to being like, yes, there are ghosts, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, there are ghosts, like,
Yeah.
um, so I love that, that there's like a more porous, kind of way of thinking about the world in which it's not everything is like super black and white, and it's like weird things can happen, right? You're not completely shut off from it.
Mhm.
And so, and also like growing up and reading Latin American literature, Latin American literature is of course like steeped in magic a lot of the times.
Mhm.
Um, and so that also contributed to like like how I was formed as a writer. Thinking, I mean, I grew up thinking that literature had to be magical in some way, otherwise it wasn't like literature. Obviously, like I learned later that there's all kinds of literature and there's realism and all of those things, right? But like in my like for me, writing always kind of like tends to go towards somewhere magical, or even if it's not fully magical, weird definitely. Um, that kind of like tests what the limits of what we perceive is, right? And so, and I also think like it's a fun way. I mean, if you're gonna write stories, for me, it's super fun to imagine things that probably couldn't happen.
Mhm.
So, um, so yeah, I think culture and also like the Latin American, literature roots all influenced my writing, obviously.
Yeah, I heard you
Yeah.
talk about in another interview this series of children's books. They're like kind of different like reading levels in Spanish, and there was this one
Yeah.
that you mentioned about like this ghost boy in this mansion, and it made me think. Also, I talk about this book. My listeners are tired of hearing about it, but there's this book that I grew up reading, and I hadn't heard about the series that you mentioned until I heard you talk about it. But this book that I grew up with, it's called Stories That Must Not Die, and it's a
Mm.
collection of folklore and fables from the Texas-Mexico border.
Oh, nice.
And this book was read to us in elementary. I have a
Wow.
copy of the book from like my second, third grade classroom, and the stories in there. There's the story of La Llorona, of La Chusa, the girl who danced with the devil. And it's
Hmm.
funny because, like you mentioned, our literature is so steeped in that magic, in that kind of paranormal world, that even at an early age, it's in our classrooms, along with, like you
Yeah.
said, when we're with family or friends, the conversation just kind of veers that way, which is
Yeah.
my favorite part of any hangout, obviously, is when we start telling ghost
Obviously.
stories. Yeah. So in reading Monstrilio, there were a lot of really, really cool themes. I think, of course, up front, like was mentioned earlier, is, it's a story of like grief, acceptance, and love and loyalty. Um, and I know that this has been brought up in other interviews, but this is also a very queer book, which I love because I love the way that you write it and the way that you talk about it, where you're like, well, yes, these people, they happen to be queer, and that's just like we exist, right? Where we're out here. And so I love the way that it's written because it's never like, and they're gay. It's just it's part of their lives. It's who they are. It's part of who they are. But also, I think it's like you do this really cool thing, and I don't know if this is how intentional this was, and I want to ask you to talk about the parallels between queerness and M's instincts slash nature. Not only maybe with his own sexuality, but just like as a creature, as a being, his base instincts. Because you've mentioned again in interviews the connection, being told between you're wrong, and being a monster and queerness. And you even asked, what if a family had to love a monster?
Right.
And that was, when I heard you say that, I was like, whoa, that's crazy to hear. Because I connected to that, and I connected to Monstrilio reading this book, like being made to feel like a monster or unnatural. And just like on a personal level, and I've spoken about this very publicly before, but as someone living with HIV, I've been living with HIV for over 10 years now.
Hmm.
I've had literal like people's physical reactions. They throw their hands back, and they jumped back. And
Right.
so this again, in reading this, I was like, whoa, like I felt like a monster in that moment. And so
Hmm.
reading this was like, so basically all of that, to ask you kind of your take on like being made to feel that way and its relationship to queerness.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think, well, a lot of what you just said is exactly how I was thinking about it. Uh, those moments of reaction, that come from people, that are like, oh my God, what? Or even more subtle moments, right? Like not everything has to be like so dramatic, but like moments that you feel other or like you don't belong and you can't like really speak about who you are,
Hmm.
right? Because it's not what people expect, or it feels like, especially when younger, like if you were like, oh, but I'm gay or whatever, it's like, why do we have to deal with this now, right? Like people were like, trying to not engage with it or something, but it's like,
Hmm.
well, but it's who I am, right? It's not nothing to be um so like reserved or not wanting to engage.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think all of those things, and I think queerdom has always been linked to monsterdom in some
Hmm.
ways. I think like from the idea of like queer people really engaging with monsters and kind of like when there's a monster in like a book or a movie, like queer people almost always identify with the monster rather than like the heroes or whatever, like
Yeah.
because there's like an innate feeling of um how society has like made us feel that we don't belong, and that's exactly how monsters feel, right? When they come into like the world. So I thought um being a monster, or like Monstrilio actually being a monster, and actually not, he in my mind he doesn't dislike being a monster. He just made to feel that he should dislike being a monster because of he shouldn't, you know, eat or whatever, but he himself is not, he's not um he's not hating that part of himself. And so it's that part of like being like, do I listen to everybody else and kind of conform to what they want of me? Because it's less dangerous. Obviously, like Monstrilio is taken to like an extreme degree, right? But it's the same idea of like, do you lessen yourself to kind of like not ruffle any feathers, and so other people are comfortable and not you? Or do you like accept that you are who you are, even if other people think you're a monster, and you just kind of own it and be like, yeah. well, maybe I am a monster, but I don't care, you know, that
Yeah.
type of thing. And so that I think it's absolutely related to a queer experience. And so I was very interested in that, and I was also very interested in that the characters, like their actual like expressions of queerness in sex and romantic relationships and all of that, those are not challenged because I wanted that part of like the world um to be just natural and be like, oh, in this world that's not an issue or that's not something that jumps out at anybody. But there's definitely the link to queerness in how Monstrilio is perceived in the world and how he thinks of himself. That kind of like acceptance for one, like self-acceptance, and kind of like just deciding what you want, how you want to navigate the world, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that you said that he doesn't dislike that part of himself, and maybe I am a monster, and I feel like that is a point in so many people's lives. I think just in general, but especially queer people, that I certainly have met that point a long time ago where I was like, you know what? Yeah, I am. I am a monster. Ike. Now what? Like,
Yeah.
what are we gonna do about it? And so, and I love that part in this book because, like you said, of course, it's in this exaggerated kind of situation. Um, but it was so cool because I can see that in his development when we get to his kind of point of view, and he's talking about how he like unhinges his jaw and it feels good, and he does it when he's alone because it does feel good, and but he's away for, I guess, from other people looking at him or judging him. And so yeah, I love that idea of, yes, I am a monster, so where do we go now?
Yeah.
And so in reading your work, aside from Monstrilio, I saw recurring themes of like what people would call body horror or gore, death and transformation, and sex. And you seem so connected on what people may describe as like on a primitive level or primordial or like base human instincts. However, I also see those things coupled with love and romance and beauty. And I was talking to my boyfriend earlier about that, and how I feel like in issue 81 of American Short Fiction, you have a short story in there, A Self-Appointed Safekeeper of Beauty. And the
Yeah.
way that you talk about, I'm just going to read a sentence here. It says, when I try, I only picture his exposed organs, a purplish beating heart, his ballooning lungs, bulging eyes, exposed teeth, perfectly crooked, and the fibers of his muscles wound tight enough to hold him upright. It just feels like I can, like, again, I see these organs like popping into my mind, building this person, but it feels like a Fabergé egg. I don't know. It's like nice and pretty, and like the way that it's kind of like structured in your writing. So yeah, I wanted to hear you speak about the connection between those things, and just like, how do you do it? How are you able to like talk about these things in honestly, truly like a beautiful way?
Oh, thank you. And also thank you for reading A Self-Appointed Safekeeper of Beauty, because that's a very recent story and I love it.
It's great.
uh, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I'm very interested obviously in the physical. And so Australia deals a lot with hunger. And I think hunger in very many different senses, right? Like literal hunger and like sexual desire and all of that. And I think, I mean, for me, like the body is very important, and um, we as humans are not just exercises, like intellectual exercises. We come in a body, and a body is like a lot, you know,
Yeah.
like both great and also awful a lot of the times, like you have to deal with a lot of stuff. And you can also like get tremendous amount of pleasure and joy from your body. And so um, in my stories, I like, or like in my writing, it just comes naturally to kind of like see the body and kind of like feel present, like flesh presence, I guess. And I also think sometimes with Monstrilio, I'll read like a review or something. It's like, oh, it's great, but they didn't need to have sex in it or whatever, which is like, yeah, I did. It's like talking about all these things about desires and hungers and like things that you want for yourself, and sex is a big part of that for a lot of people. And I think for my characters, it is in different ways, but that expression of body is very important. And also because a core thing for Monstrilio, the character, is his body changing, right? And
Mhm.
so for other people, so people comment on it, directly or indirectly. Um, there's a lot that people want to do to his body, good and bad. And so it's like, but it's my own, and what does that mean, right? And how do I express that? And also, his instincts and his desires are in his body, right? And so it's not separate. And so for me, writing about bodies and about physicality and what you call like primordial things, it's very important. I love thinking about like what makes us human, like beyond like reason and all of that, like more like the more biological and animalistic things that we have, and how we build upon that, like beliefs and structures and systems that help us and sometimes or many times hinder us from experiencing the world. But it all starts in being like creatures of flesh and blood, and you know, and so I think for me, it's super interesting to think about bodies and what we hold before we start making stories or like reasoning about them, and then that juxtaposition into what we like may believe or not believe, and what we can create or not create. And so, yeah, I think it's super interesting. And obviously, as I said in Montreal, I was super interested in hunger, and hunger is one of those like primary or primordial things that we all have, right? And as in society or like in our societies, we're taught to kind of like always mitigate hunger or control it, right? Literal hunger, like don't eat that much, or like know what you eat, like there's a whole industry and like psychology around like eating, but also sex. Obviously, sex is super controlled and super. It's like such a topic for us humans, which is super interesting, right? And so those things for me are really, really interesting, um, and something that I explore often in my writing.
Yeah, and I love it. I also want to give a shout out to another of your short stories, The Smiling Man,
Oh
which
yeah,
was in the 2024 fall issue of the Columbia Review. Um, God, that story was just so good. And again, this mention of like hunger and the flesh. And I kind of like I wrote my notes here, and so I'm curious about your idea on this, because this is something that everyone can read right now, and I highly encourage it. But I wrote here that there's this thing, this monster that takes pieces of you, and not everyone can see it. And even if it starts to take pieces of them, they cannot always see it. Uh, and sometimes it rids you of them entirely, and you try to tell people about it, but then they don't understand. So then you keep it to yourself. And then someone finally can see it, and they can help you fight it. And I honestly, I got teary eyed when I read it, because I was like, this is a beautiful romance story. This is a
yeah,
romance story. And I think maybe on like the surface, someone would see some of the words in here, some of the descriptions or what's happening. They'd be like, no, this is a scary story. And I mean, I think it can be both, but I thought it was just such a beautiful story about love when I got to the end of it. And I was like holding back tears because it was so, so good. So I don't know. I would just like to see if you would like to say anything about The Smiling Man.
yeah. Oh, well, thank you again for reading it, and I love that story. It's a story I wrote a long time ago, and it has gone through like many revisions, but I really like it. And you're absolutely right. It is to me also like a romance story. It's a love story, right? and I wrote it that way, and it's like a, or you could say it's like a horror story with a happy ending or
Yeah.
something like that. So yeah, I mean, and I think it's um all about physicality. I think that that's one of those stories that I wrote, and I was really, really thinking about bodies and like consuming and what it means, and also what you owe yourself or what you owe to somebody else, right?
Mhm.
Um, and also, I think um, so. The smiling man, like that idea. So when I was very young, well, younger, like I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 or something, I got like a really nasty like stomach virus or something. And so I had like a really high fever, um, and I was delirious for a while. And my mom says I said like I was seeing like a man with a hat in the room.
Oh my
I I can't really remember that because I was sick, I guess.
God. Hmm.
But that stuck with me, right? And so in that story, there's like a man with a hat in a room, and that's the smiling man. So that's where that comes from. And also, obviously, it reminds me of like the Babadook or
Hmm.
other creatures like that. Um, or is it No Name from Spirited Away?
No
Um,
face.
No Face, No
Yeah.
Face. Yeah, so like creatures like that, it reminds me of. And so it's like a very mysterious presence, that you don't know if it's good or evil or if
Hmm.
it's gonna help you somehow or like really like destroy you. And so I was like really interested in that. And as you know, as we talked about, I love creatures, and so I love thinking about what they can do or not do or what they mean.
Oh my God. I love that story so much. It's so, so good. And
Thank you.
I'll be linking these things also in like the episode description so people can go read them because yeah. Um, speaking of the smiling man, in another interview that you did, you told a story, and I thought that at first that they were related, but I'm hearing
Mhm,
now that they're not. But you told a story of when you were with your family living in San Luis Potosí, that your
mhm.
sister claimed to see a man in her room. And so I was wondering if that had inspired this story at all, or the story of the smiling man. But it's a different, I think, equally horrifying story that you're seeing
Yeah.
this man. But I mean, for the listeners, if you could tell that story about what your sister saw, and if you have any other uh, scary stories or encounters with the paranormal, we would love to hear them.
Right. So, maybe it did actually, like maybe in one part of my mind that also inspired the Smiling Man. Like it's like
Yeah.
a collection of things that inspire you, and like you never know exactly
Yeah.
what you're pulling from, but probably like that's there. So we were living in San Luis Potosí. We only lived there for a year, and for those people that don't know, it's like a city more toward the north of Mexico. Um, and we lived a little bit away from like the actual city. We lived like in an other part that it's called La Florida, and it's kind of like a little bit secluded. And it's very like there's a lot of trees in like a state that is more desertic. So it was like nice, and we lived in a big house. But most of the time, because my dad had to be working away during that year, it was mostly my mom, my sister, and I living there. Um, and so um, it just felt as kids, it just felt like it was haunted or something. I don't know. It just like like everything felt like very solitary in a way. And I think my sister, she's older, and I think she like lived like she was more like in tune to those things. I don't know, but like there was one night that she started screaming in the middle of the night, and she's like, "Oh, there's a man in my room," and so we all came to her room, And we brought like the dog in and everything. And so like just because like we didn't know if like actually was a man or like because when we got to her room there was no one, but we didn't know if like maybe he had escaped or something. I mean, we had no idea what was going on.
Hmm.
And so we brought the dog in and we were like through the house all together with the dog. And when we got to her room, he started barking at the closet. And we're like, oh my
Oh my
God,
god.
like Jesus, like they must be there or whatever. And so, but we opened it and there was nothing, but like the dog kept barking. And so, well, that night we all like slept together and, you know, but yeah, like, my sister and my mother like said they saw like in Mexico like they say las brujas, which is those like balls of light that like
Hmm.
shoot around. They saw a bunch of those in that house. I don't remember seeing like anything myself, but it definitely was a scary. I definitely felt haunted in a way,
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean like uh yeah, it was definitely that house that had some sort of presence or energy or whatever it was, but it definitely was something. And so yeah, I mean, and so it's what like we were saying at the beginning, like you believe and you not believe, but you kind of like believe, because it's like, well, you felt it, and and s- there's something, right? And
Hmm.
so those experiences kind of like stay with you, and also living in San Luis Potosí, which is like an older city. Um, well, Mexico City's old too, but like there's more diversity, but like it just felt more rooted maybe in ghosts,
Hmm.
something.
Yeah. Was
Yeah.
did you all did your family build that house, or did you like it was already there and you moved into it? Like, do you know any history of it?
I don't know. No, my parents built that house. Um, and we were supposed to move there fully, but it just didn't work out, and we had to move away from San Luis. But yeah, but like that area, I think more. I mean, like I think someone in my family said like it had to be built, like it was built on top of like a burial site or like by
Something.
accident or something. But I don't know if that's just like what they feel or if there's any truth in that.
Yeah.
But it feels that area that had um so I can't so like La Florida, that area where we lived, it was built by, I can't remember exactly who, but it was like a family that came and they kind of like wanted to have like a more like foresty type place, so they kind of like made it like artificially in a way made it, but
Mm.
it kind of like grew and it had like these huge beautiful trees that had been living there for years and years. Um so it was kind of like an oasis where maybe there shouldn't be an oasis. I don't know. So it had like from its inception, it had like an artificiality that it's
Hmm.
very interesting. But like by the time we moved there, it was like an old time, and like all the trees had taken root, and it was like a very beautiful thing. But it was also like different from the rest of the state, and kind of like made up in a way. So that's interesting, I think. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe like this disturbance to the land,
Yeah,
caused something to show up and
yeah,
retaliate.
yeah.
So as was mentioned in your bio earlier, you are working on your next novel. Can you share anything about your next novel?
Um. It's almost there. It's not yet completed, but hopefully very soon.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, I think um I don't know, it's weird. I think it kind of I don't think like Monstrilio is like full on horror,
Hmm.
but it definitely has horror elements. Um and I think this new novel does. I mean, it also kind of like. takes on like elements of the supernatural or what it means to be like a different creature and things like
Hmm.
that. Um, but it's not, but it's also not horror.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's also family in a different way. So like, yeah, I mean, I'm excited about it. I don't know. I haven't said anything very specific, but yeah.
No,
It,
no, I'm into it. I'm into the mystery, and also I think you gave us just enough. I'm also very excited about it. Um, I just thought of something too, and I wanted to ask you to speak to the listeners about it. In another interview, I did a lot of research, by the way, for this
yes,
because
I can
also,
see. I love it. Thank you so
uh,
much.
of course, and I mean also I loved hearing you talk about your process and your writing, and so you part of that process you spoke about in writing Monstrilio that you spoke to, I think, people, or you listened to shows or podcasts, or I'm not exactly, but you consumed something about like grief, because the way that you talk about grief in this book is it's so good, and I feel like a lot of horror uh uses grief, or yeah, a lot of people that write about grief, they use horror basically as like the vehicle or the analogy. And I've had other interviews on here that have done something similar. But it's so interesting to see how everyone does it. And especially in Monstrilio, I think it was an amazing take on grief. And so I wanted to ask if you could share your process on like the research that you did to write about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think grief comes up a lot in horror just because it's horrific itself.
Mhm, yeah.
So it makes sense. It's like they go hand in hand. And I think, um, so personally, I haven't suffered like a loss as big, like losing a child, or I don't have kids or anything. So, like, I don't know the experience personally, but I listened to to testimonials from people that have lost children, and I think what you get from those is that everybody kind of like lives it in very different ways. And I think that's what also like led me to think of different voices in the book, just because everybody kind of has like their own way of dealing with such a horrific event. And then um you pull on your own personal experiences with grief, right? Like maybe it's not exactly that, but in a way, in different ways, we've all have dealt with grief. And so just kind of like tapping into those feelings, and kind of like it was very interesting to explore from different point of views, just because it allowed for grief to take different forms, and to kind of like understand that there's no right or wrong way to do it. Um, and also for Magos, I think I love Magos. I know like not everybody loves Magos, but I do. And she's the most active, I think, of all the characters in the book.
Yeah.
And she kind of like takes, maybe not the best way, but she takes the reins of life, like she's not gonna let anything like come in between her and what she wants, or what she thinks she wants, or what she thinks is supposed to happen. So she does a lot to kind of reshape her world, and that to me is super interesting. Um, and I think whereas Joseph is more passive in his grief, in
Hmm.
the way it's like he's just kind of like letting it like go through him, and kind of like uh, letting it take its course. Maybe in like a more traditional way. I don't know if that even is a thing, um, but that was very interesting to me also, like that juxtaposition of people. Understanding, and also for Monstrilio, there's a grief in, because Monstrilio is not Santiago, but he
Hmm.
feels like there's a process that he has to go through, which to me felt a little bit like grief of like letting go either he had to let go of him being a monster and kind of like hiding that forever, or letting go of his family in a way and just like their expectations and all of that, and that is also kind of like a loss. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think, and grief is such a potent engine, right, for for a narrative. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's it's not something I would always want to do.
Yeah.
I like because it's a lot, but I also tried for the book to have levity because I think grief is also not all suffering, right? Like
Mhm.
there's moments it's weird and it's layered. Um, yeah, and also grief is a lot about love,
Yeah.
right? Um, that's where it stems from because if we didn't love things or people, we wouldn't grieve for them. So I wanted it to be really about love.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so, so much. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
yeah, as mentioned earlier, we are doing a giveaway together, which I'm very excited about. So if y'all are interested in winning a signed copy of Monstrilio, you can do so by following both Gerardo at hello.samanito and myself on Instagram. I will make a post and I will tag Gerardo on there so you can follow both of us. Of course, like the post and tag one of your ghoul friends in the comments so that we can choose a winner from there. And if you all cannot wait to win a copy, I highly suggest running out and picking one up if you haven't yet. It is an amazing, amazing book. I truly enjoyed it, and I truly, truly enjoy all your other writing as well, which again, I'll be linking in
Thank
the
you.
description so that people can read that. Um, before we go, can you please let people know where they can find you and your work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at hello.samanito. Or you can visit my website, which is gerardosamanocordova.com, and I have like links to my stories and to upcoming events, even though I don't have any right now, but like there will be some hopefully.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, and other interviews I've done and things like that. So you can check that out.
All right. Thank you again so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. Welcome back, Ghoul friends. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Again, if you have not had a chance to go and pick up a copy of Monstrilio, I highly, highly cannot recommend it enough. It is such a good book. I didn't even show on camera earlier, but you can see my little tabs here if you're watching the video. You can check out more of his short stories. I'm linking the two that we spoke about in the episode description. And again, if you would like to enter the giveaway, you need to follow both of our accounts on Instagram, like the post, and then tag a ghoul friend in the comments. And we are giving away a signed copy of Monstrilio. So very excited about that. Again, please subscribe to Susto's YouTube. That's youtube.com/@Susto podcast, which is the handle for every social media platform for Susto, where you can follow for any and all updates on the shows and giveaways. And as always, if you would like to hear your own story on a Letters from the Beyond episode, please visit the link at my link tree. That's linktr.ee/Susto, and you can submit your story there or by visiting sustopodcast.com. As always, if you would like to support the show, the easiest way to do so is by engaging wherever you are listening, liking, subscribing, leaving positive ratings and reviews, leaving comments, sharing with your own ghoul friends, and if you would like to support with money dollars by signing up to be a Patreon, where you can listen to episodes early and ad-free, and depending on your tier, you can get the video versions of the episodes. You can do so by visiting patreon.com/sustopodcast. A big shout out to this episode's patrons. You are Liza, Sadie, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, Dee, Josette, Sam, Mandy, Jules, Lori, Jeannie, Monica, Desiree C, Ashes, Neres Vanessa, Rachel, Azucena, Marlene, Chata, Lainey, Desiree A, Carla, Archer, Ricardo, Vanessa, Maritza, Nieves, Manormal, Iris, Mad, Flor, and Selena. Thank you all so much for your support. You keep this little Monstrilio going. And thank you to everybody for listening. I will talk to you in the next one. And until then, no te asustes. Bye.